And welcome to our What About Me brackets N, What About Men Engaging Everyone in Diversity, Equity and Inclusion session as part of the Dive In Festival. Really excited to be here. I'm Richard Chapman-Harris. My pronouns are he, him. I'm the Global Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Leader for Marsh McLennan. An audio description of me is I'm a white male with brown hair, brown beard with a few gray bits in there here and there as well. And I'm wearing a pink shirt and I'm sat in my living room, which is pretty green. And you may hear in the background my dog that will bark occasionally, probably at the most inopportune moment, during the panel. So I'll make sure to kind of mute myself, but really pleased to be here. And thank you so much for joining us. I will share my screen shortly. That'll be the fun technical bit, and talk through the agenda and the learning objectives. And I'll set the scene for the session before we invite our panelists to join and to share their experiences and insights as well. So again, thank you so much for joining us today, and hopefully have a really great session, and please do engage. We'll also touch a bit more on some takeaways at the end of the session as well. So let me share my screen. Hopefully you can see this. And this is our session today. So briefly on the agenda, what we'd like to cover in the next 60 minutes, which will go so quickly from experience. And if you join other sessions, I know it goes very quickly when you're having fun. So I've introduced myself. I'll share a little bit of the context for today, just explaining, what about men? What about me? What's that sort of meaning? Why are we talking about this as a topic in particular? We'll then listen to our panel, and they'll do their introduction shortly as well. And as I mentioned, we'll touch on some next steps, and we'll leverage our ally continuum, which is a specific model that hopefully will help us to be allies, including allies to and for men, as well as allies as men going forward. And so the learning objectives, because it's really exciting that Dive In sessions are recognized and have CPD accreditation to it. So really what we'll do today is 4 key things. So the first thing is to understand kind of gender norms and workplace context for men. We'll look at the lens of kind of colleagues, family, and friends, because although we're looking at the workplace, these are skill sets and learnings that we can take anywhere with us, on the bus to work, or, when having parties with friends. It's important that we can really bring in inclusive gender norms in our social spaces as well as our workplaces as well. So we'll hopefully access examples of intersectionality. And by that, we mean looking at different demographics of intersecting or overlapping identities. So recognizing where an individual may be a woman as well as an ethnic minority, or maybe someone who's part of the LGBT community and has a disability. As human beings, we're amazing creatures. And actually, there's so many aspects to our identities that we're not just one monolith. And it's important we recognize those intersecting and overlapping identities and experiences as well. Of course, it's really important as human beings, we like to hear from each other and learn from each other. So again, personal and professional insights from the panelists. And again, huge thank you for joining us. I know Sabrina will talk through and manage the group in a minute. But again, how do we practically engage men and everyone in DEI in particular? And of course, I mentioned to identify next steps. So hopefully from today, you'll learn, you'll listen, you'll engage, but also think, well, what am I going to do differently? And that's the action, that's the real kind of takeaway piece that we'd like to focus on and touch on as part of today as well. So a bit of context, and we'll touch on and we mentioned about men as colleagues in particular, and just kind of outlining why we're focusing on this session. And I've been working in the D&I space for just over 18 years now. It's quite a long time. And I've had specifically clients engage with me and sort of say, well, actually, we see lots of engagement from our colleagues, but we feel there's a demographic who kind of, Richard, look a bit like you, who we'd like to engage more in D&I, and we don't always see them kind of connecting and engaging in this space. And so I think it's important through that lens to look at how do we engage men in DEI, but as part of that, make sure that the language we use doesn't exclude that demographic, even if unintentionally. And I think an important point to highlight here is that we're referring to examples that are based on the gender binary, but that is not with the aim of being exclusionary. And we'll talk through where we have examples of where we can engage non-binary aspects and examples as well. So this is highlighting where we can see the experiences of men, and men earn 23% more than women globally. And so it's not to say, well, great, men are fine, men are sorted. Actually, they earn more, and obviously the gender pay gap is usually in men's favor, but it's just highlighting where gender norms are disadvantaging women. But also, although the data may make it look like it's benefiting men, we also hear dialogues around pressure for men to be the breadwinner, and how do we unpick those narratives as well. So again, we see that there are ethnicity pay gaps for men as well. And so with ethnic minority men in the UK, where the data is captured, do have pay gaps compared to white men as well, and where we can see that intersectionality affecting a diversity of men. And that's something that's important for us to scrutinize as well. So again, the point about visibility at leadership levels and across organizations, some of our major industries are very male dominated. And if we're going to affect culture change on DEI, we need to make sure it is speaking to that demographic, that implicitly there's certain groups that feel like, well, that's not for me, or that's not about me. It may not be that they're not supportive of DEI. And of course, that does happen in spaces, but it might just be that there's an apathy because it feels as though the language doesn't speak to that group. And I was doing some numbers, looking up some numbers last night. But again, for our industry, for insurance, again, this does vary depending on where you go in the globe. But actually, we do have more gender balance in our industry compared to other sectors as well. So again, as we kind of mentioned, it's important to identify and understand how this plays out for people of all genders, and how the narrative around gender norms, and I know Sabrina and I were talking about this morning, how do we tackle those gender norms to make sure that everyone is included? Because the restrictive nature of things like the gender binaries does not advantage everybody in the same way, or indeed doesn't actually advantage everybody fairly as well. So thinking about the workplace and our men as colleagues, one of the key points that comes up in lots of research and guidance is looking at what are some of the things that we can do with regards to our policy and process. And if we're thinking about making real change and looking at gender equality, we need to look at things like our employee life cycle. And one of the key points based on the research is looking at aspects like absences from work, and also the motherhood penalty with regards to parental leave, and aspects like shared parental leave, and also parental leave requirements or mandates do help. And looking at one way of closing the gap is seeing that we offer things like shared parental leave and encourage the father in most cases to be taking more parental leave, and to lean in more to taking time out of work, so that there isn't that same motherhood penalty. And again, that will play out differently depending on parental structures and also same-sex parents, adoptions, etc. One of the examples that I wanted to highlight, and there'll be lots of examples across the globe and quite a few across the Nordics as well, is actually seeing that men's share of parental leave was really low, but again, with the kind of the quotas and support from the Icelandic government, actually saw that increasing quite markedly. And I know there's similar examples in Scandinavia as well. However, one of the most recent research has highlighted that although more fathers will take the time off because it's mandated, if you actually then look at the division of labor, it's that most of the time will be taken off around holidays, for example. So it'd be an extension of annual leave. And it doesn't mean that then the father is taking on the majority of the caring work. And so it may be that actually they're more available for children, but actually aren't taking on the primary carer role. And so there are still then gender norms, restricted gender norms that are impacting. And that overlays with feedback from young men who want to be more actively engaged as a co-parent with their children as well. And how do we do that is to unpick those gender norms that are saying, well, no, this is what you do and this is what you do. And actually, that's not really meeting the needs. Increasingly, we're hearing, especially from younger men, but also men of all ages. So these are a few key areas we want to highlight. And again, we'll pull these out in the conversation with the panel, is that mental health is a real focal area. So International Men's Day coming up on November 19th. And I know in my career, when we have International Women's Day on March the 8th, or International Women's Month in March, you always get the kind of commentary of like, well, when's International Men's Day? And there's no day for us, and actually that can be sort of meant in a sort of positive way, like, well, what about us? What about me, brackets N? But really what it's saying is like, well, actually, I'm not aware that we've had International Men's Day for several years now. And it's about supporting and engaging everybody. And there is a date that kind of focuses that attention. But a lot of the resources on International Men's Day websites across the world will very much focus on mental health, and some really, really shocking statistics with regards to male suicide, especially amongst young men as well. And I highlighted there again that we do know there are gaps in the data, and we see underreporting for non-binary and gender non-conforming people in lots of geographies. And some research suggested that those data numbers are also going to be extremely high as well. So one of the headlines is also toxic masculinity actually can indeed be toxic. And so looking at how men need to make healthier choices with regards to food and diet, even some research looking at things like drug abuse as well amongst men, and how that will disproportionately impact men's health, and so how it's important to unpick those gendered norms and those destructive norms to support men in being healthier, to look after themselves in order to look after others as well. And also some of the data points, and I know these are quite sort of serious topics, and it's important that we do address these in the workplace, and these are conversations I know we've had as part of Dive In as well, is that men do perpetrate more domestic and sexual abuse, which needs to be addressed. And also men can be the survivors of that, and there's underreporting as men as survivors of abuse. But we do see, again, shocking numbers with regards to the experiences of young women, and again, the perpetrators being disproportionately men, and thinking about how do we tackle that and how do we address that, rather than not talking about these very difficult topics and subjects as well. So with that, just some context pieces I wanted to kind of lay the foundations and explain of why we're focusing on this conversation, why it's important to talk with and about men and to listen as well. And hopefully that's what we'll be doing in the panel. So Sabrina, always a pleasure working with you, and thank you so much for joining us, but I'll hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Richard. Thank you for this brilliant introduction and setting the context for us. I'm Sabrina Kruse. I'm delighted to be here with you this morning to facilitate our panel discussion. I'm currently working at SCORE as the group head of DEI and engagement, and also the head of HR for the EMEA region. I'm also involved in many DI initiatives in the market, and I'm a committee member, for example, of IWIN, the Insurance Women Inclusivity Network. A short audio description of me: mixed race female, brown hair, signature red lips, dressed in red. And if you can hear an accent and wondering where it's from, I am French originally, but have been in the UK for close to 18 years now. So the French is disappearing to be replaced by an accent from somewhere in the world. We have got some wonderful panelists with us today, and I'll hand over to each of them to give us a short description of themselves, and what they do. We'll start with Mark. Thank you very much, Mark, for joining this morning.
Sabrina, thank you. And Richard, also thank you as well. So my name's Mark Freed. My pronouns are he and him, although these days I prefer to look at gender as on a spectrum and not to be put in a box. An audio description of myself: I'm a 64-year-old white, grey-haired man. I have a pair of black-rimmed glasses on, a white shirt, and behind me I have some Lego models. You can probably see the Houses of Parliament and some flowers. And indeed, maybe a picture that was painted by a great friend of mine, a fantastic artist from Japan called Tetsuo Aida. Today, I'm managing director of an organization called Men for Inclusion. I've been in this industry, this sector, the D&I sector, for 25 years. Prior to that, I had a career at Credit Suisse.
Thank you so much, Mark. Next, we've got on our panel, Topsy Ojo. Topsy, thank you so much for introducing yourself.
Thank you very much, Sabrina. Thank you, Richard, as well, and good morning to everybody tuning in. I'm going to have a fantastic morning. My name's Topsy Ojo. In a former life, I was a professional rugby player at London Irish for 16 years. More recently, a broadcaster working on ITV, TNT, Amazon Prime, and so on and so forth. For the description, I'm a black male, about to turn 40 next year, so very much looking forward to that. No hair, unfortunately, jealous of both Mark and Glyn and everyone else on the panel. Lost my hair a long time ago. Sat here in a black polo shirt, one of my favorites. No background, because you'll just see the state of the garden that I've put up all summer long. and haven't got around to tidying up. So pleasure to be here. Looking forward to a fantastic morning with you and talking about this really important subject.
Thank you, Topsy. And finally, we've got Glyn with us today as well.
Yeah, thanks, Sabrina, and morning, everyone. Great to be here. So, yeah, my name's Glyn Thoms. So I am a late 40s white male, joining from southeast London. I think my picture's been quite kind there because my hair's not quite so black these days and I'm wearing glasses now, so I've got ever deteriorating eyesight. My pronouns are he and him. I currently work for WTW in GB. I'm a member of our Global Phoenix I&D committee, and I'm also one of the co-chairs of our Men as Allies network.
Thank you, Glyn. So let's kick off our discussion with all of you here and really take a dive in, excuse the pun, into the topic of engaging everybody into DEI, and particularly try to create more engagement around bringing men into the DEI conversation. Maybe I'll start with you, Mark, and Richard touched on some key figures, some key, context and data points about why, sort of making it quite obvious that there is a real business case for men to be engaged in DI and to involve everyone. But can we perhaps talk a little bit more about why it is so important to focus on engaging everyone?
Thanks, Sabrina. Yeah, I'm going to make a few quotes to start with. These were quotes of Emma Watson, the actress Harry Potter, made to the United Nations 10 years ago, September 2014, almost exactly 10 years ago. She started off by saying, "We will never progress if only half the world are invited or feel welcome." And clearly, when we look at the progress we've made, when you look at gender pay gap stats historically in the UK, we haven't progressed very far, very quickly. In fact, progress is at a glacial pace. The other thing, and next thing that she said is, we don't often talk about men being imprisoned by gender stereotypes, but I can see that they are, and that when they are free, things will change for women as a natural consequence. DE&I, particularly the I, has got a major benefit for men as well. I think part of our problem is that historically, when you look at the maturity curve of DE&I initiatives, it started with a business case. It moved on to collecting data and seeing where the gaps were. We then recognized we needed more women in the industry, so we went on recruitment drives. We then recognized that if they were going to stay, we needed to change HR policy. We then recognized that if they were going to stay, progress, thrive, and flourish, we needed to support and help them because of our male-dominated culture. So we had allies that supported and helped those women to succeed in the existing culture. But inclusion is the great unlock for everybody. Inclusion is about everybody, yeah, and that's the final step on the journey. And whereas the other steps all focused on characteristics other than straight white men, inclusion is about straight white men as well. It benefits us. It allows us to free ourselves from outdated male stereotypes and enrich our lives as well as everybody else's.
Thank you, Mark. And, Glyn, Topsy, how does that resonate with you? What Mark is saying around inclusion becoming the main focal point to actually engage everybody?
Yeah, I mean, just to jump in, it's one of those where whenever you try to implement change of sorts, you take some along with you for the journey and others get left behind. And it's actually really important that you don't take your eye off the ball in terms of one group versus the other. I mean, that's a huge thing of why we're here. I think, as we'll get into probably a bit later on, certain groups maybe feel they become the priority and others get left behind. Whereas actually, if you look through the whole of DE&I, as Mark just touched on, it is about everybody. It is about all groups. It is about equality and including everybody as a part of that. So the big thing is to not leave anybody behind. I think, you know, if you fully embrace this, it is about everybody benefiting, real positive change so that we can all benefit going forward. So that's kind of a message that needs to be reinforced so people don't feel like they're being left out.
I think for me as well, from a gender perspective, it's really the inclusivity bit's so important, because you've got to sort of avoid it looking like it's one group versus another, because that's just so, you know, counterproductive. That clearly men have a massive role to play in this being the majority demographic. And I think it's really important to look at that inclusivity. You know, what are the challenges we've got to address, and how are we going to do that collectively without it just becoming, right, this is a man issue or this is a woman issue. I think it's interesting. Richard, you mentioned at the start about International Men's Day. You know, I still see people roll their eyes a bit when they hear the mention of International Men's Day, that this is a day that's about men. You know, why do we need a day about men when actually there's a lot of really great issues that are covered as part of International Men's Day. One of the networks I'm involved with at WTW, our Men as Allies network, I think if you take the acronym, which is MAN, that could be perceived as, right, this is a network about men, when actually this is about how do we help people become better allies as a whole around gender equity. So I do think that point on inclusivity is really, really important.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Glyn and Topsy, sorry.
Sorry.
Do you think the journey that we've been on of you know, representation, policy, allies, if you like, does, because it's focused on, if we're talking gender, men and women, it actually almost, it's not surprising it creates some gender conflict. It's not surprising when you know, Glyn and myself are probably looked at as being the privileged people on this call, but maybe we don't feel privileged. It may be that then, you know, we've been called biased, we've been called microaggressive, and through the journey, and we get to this point now and we say, okay, we want men to step up and become involved, that a lot of people are feeling alienated and cross, and not wanting to get involved. And I think that's where inclusion, actually, it takes all of those things out and we start to embrace everybody to move forward into the kind of world and workplaces we all want to work in.
Absolutely. And to your point, you know, sort of, Mark, you know, the role that men have been asked to play today, it was either to change the way they operate or be a sponsor or be the voice of others. But there's a much wider role, right, that men can play into actually being advocated, you know, not as ally or representative of other to create a springboard for others, but to create a springboard for themselves, right?
Yeah.
Glyn, perhaps some of the work that you do with your network, you can tell us a bit more about the role that men can play in that discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of your points, Mark, you've got to look at the barriers, right? You've got to look at trying to understand what some of the reasons why haven't you got more men at the table initially, but actually for the ones that you've got at the table, how do you help people on that journey? And I think that word journey is really important, because, you know, this is a long process, and that journey is going to look, I think, different for different people and different organizations. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that, because when, you know, if I look at what we've been trying to do through our Men as Allies network, which is really focused on the education piece, education and awareness piece, through some toolkit sessions we've been done, not a training, you know, I'd resist calling it training, because I just think that's, you know, not the right way to explain it. This is about how do we give people the tools to be aware of some of these issues and manage some of the challenges. I feel that's really important, whether that's trying to get more people open or to the table around the discussion, but actually the people you've got to the table, how do you move them from being just sort of awareness to being actually active advocates or active allies? And that is a journey. And I go back to what I said at the start, that can look different for different individuals and different for different organizations. But I think it's really important, because then when you're looking at how can you better support people, you've kind of got to know where people are starting from in the first place. That's my experience anyway.
Glyn, on that, do you feel certainly, you know, when we speak to a lot of men who say I'm an ally, and we ask them, okay, what do they do? Using a very simple example of, you it's more likely that a woman is going to get interrupted in a meeting. Yeah, and we ask an ally what he does. Is quite often he says he coaches, mentors, and supports that woman to speak up in the meeting. Yeah. I don't think that gets us as far as recognizing actually that the culture in that meeting and the way the meeting is being run is wrong. Yeah, and actually, there's probably a lot of quiet voices in that room, not just the woman's. And if we change the way the meeting is run, which is in my terms the difference between diversity and inclusion, let's change the way the meeting is run, and it benefits everybody. It also gives us the business case. How do you differentiate? Do you see that differentiate as well?
I do, and I think you've got let's say a short and a mid-term, longer term issue there, where the short term, in situations you've got to be comfortable to, address the situation as it happens, however, whatever that looks like. But I think you've also then got to learn from that. And is there sort of a medium to longer term change around culture that needs to happen, or is that just driven by one individual rather than a culture issue? I think you've got to dig into that a bit more. But I think for me, trying to sort of give people the more confidence to be able to do that is a big starting point. I'm quite focused on, these are huge topics, and I think that at times, the statistics you shared, Richard, are really interesting, but at times I think it can feel a bit overwhelming for people. And the more I think you can break it down into like, what are some of the practical day-to-day actions you can take, or that you can ask people to take in that situation of, Mark used to say, someone being talked over in a meeting and feeling confident to sort of call that out a little bit or address that. I think the more we can sort of integrate some of those day-to-day actions that we want people to take, that will start to have an impact over time and start to address some of the sort of medium, longer term cultural changes, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with that wholeheartedly. I think, especially from a sporting background, where it has traditionally always been very male dominated, you speak to people like, right, we need to change the culture, we need to change the environment. And some of the initial response is always, well, why do we need to change something that has already worked? All of us here in the room are comfortable with it. Why do we need to do something different? But then on Glyn's point about, right, you kind of identify the small steps, the small benefits, don't go too big too early, and then slowly and surely you have to allow people to see that change themselves, see the benefits for it themselves, to the point where they go, oh, right, okay, now I understand, now I get it. And then it starts to influence the whole culture. It is a journey, isn't it? There's no quick fixes about it. And sometimes you do wish that things would happen a bit quicker, because we talk about the progress and the rate of change, and sometimes it seems to take an eternity to get to where you want to. But I guess, as with all these things, it's worth it in the end. And it's about continuing to have these conversations as well. Don't flag it in the first meeting of the year and then it gets forgotten about, and then a year later go, oh, why didn't we do this and that? It's a continuous development piece that just needs to keep being referenced to ensure that we can continue to change things for the better.
And I think I know we're talking about gender today, but I think the more comfortable people get with being allies and advocates for gender, that will just apply across the whole I&D spectrum, in my view, as a whole, and people will just become better allies and advocates for everything, which has got to be a better situation.
Yeah, to these points Richard was mentioning, and it's been as well mentioned by a few of you, that one of the reasons why there's been this kind of tension around the discussions on D&I is by pitching it with gender and opposing two genders together, men and women. But really, the reality is intersectionality is there, and there aren't even two big groups. There are a number of different communities of people with very different backgrounds, journeys within this group. Topsy, perhaps that's something you could expand on. Sort of how can we do a better job actually at recognizing the differences of journeys, the uniqueness of everybody's journey and what they bring to the table to make it a more inclusive discussion.
Yeah, well, I'd say one of the biggest things from the outset, I should say, is to kind of dispel any fears. I think, again, when you talk about change, people get scared. When you tell somebody to do something different to what they've always done, they think, well, why should I? This is working. But then actually, if you can get people to look around the room and see what they've got in them, we just look at our panel currently, we've spoken about all our different backgrounds already. Again, from my experience in sport, you get people from all over the world, different sorts of backgrounds, different heritage, different cultures, different religions, and there is no one size fits all when it comes to that. So actually, if from the top of the organization throughout the culture in terms of how things are run and how they're done, if you can have that inclusion piece where everybody feels involved, everybody looks after, it's only going to be to the benefit of the group. So you might need more women in the building because they just see things that the guys can't. The guys are used to how their predecessors did it, both on and off the field. So unless you change something drastically, and this isn't to say that what was done previously doesn't work, you give them a different perspective. Sometimes you give them a competitive advantage in terms of they might be able to see something that the rest of us just can't. Talking about the different religions and cultures, you get in, for example, say a coach who has a Samoan background, an African background. He just might be able to relate to that group in a way that the others can't. And that's not to say that, let's try our head coach can't, but actually you're managing your people in the best way possible. You're giving them the tools to succeed. You're giving them the tools to feel confident. And actually, you can then start to learn off the different people that you have in the building. So I think, men traditionally, like I say, from a sports point of view, have been in control, have had the power, but it's actually, as sports is a continually progressive development even, you're always thinking about how you get better, how you improve the organization, how you improve what you're doing on the field, how you're improving what you do off the field. So actually nailing this in terms of getting everybody included, in terms of an equal playing field, because like I say, sport is such a diverse world. You are never, ever going to get a group of people who have the same background. So actually, the more you can tailor things to that for both men, women, whoever is in the building, you are going to increase your chances of success. I think that's starting to be proven more and more now. There is still a lot of work to do. Again, I spoke earlier about the rate of change. Are there more women at the top table? No. Are there more people of color at the top table? No, compared to, I guess, people on field. That will continue to change and it will continue to get highlighted. If you look in the women's game, in particular, both rugby, both football, there's still a ton of female players, but not that many male coaches. Sorry, not that many female coaches, I should say. There's still a lot of male coaches in the female game. So they're trying to figure out how do we improve that as well. So there is work to do, but I guess it's important, like you said in the question, to understand that I guess the guys that are there in charge at the minute just start to implement those small steps to say, you know what, just have a look at this. This might work. This might benefit you. This might help change the organization and we can get to a better place around things.
Mark, I'm going to turn to you. The paradox I think that we're facing now in organization is that by wanting to support better the different communities and all that, we've ended up nearly in a space where we've developed micro policies, micro mechanism and all that. And that's resulted in perhaps in the opposite effect, right? Because by focusing on, on really a specific group of people to make it better for them, you automatically and accidentally exclude the rest. So from your perspective, how can we nearly unpick that and actually fast track the inclusion for all in order to be better supportive of everyone?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and we're on a kind of an interesting journey here. It's kind of, I guess, if somebody was looking at this screen and not knowing us, they'd look at it and say, there's three white guys, a black guy, and a woman. And that's sort of diversity, and then they might get to know Richard a little more and think, oh yeah, okay, so there's also a gay guy on the call. Inclusion and where we want to get to and where we want to get to on the journey is I don't want to be managed, developed. My aspirations are probably different from Glyn's. Yeah, so I want people to know me as Mark and really get to know and understand me. Let's throw away all of those diversity characteristics. I want, at the end of this call to say, I was on this great call with Topsy, Richard, Glyn, and Sabrina. And, think about us as individual people and get to know us as individual people. And that's good leadership. That's good inclusive leadership, is understanding the people who are in our team and making sure that that team has got different and diverse points of view, come from different and diverse backgrounds. But at the end of the day, if that's all, if we're just building a team and putting tick boxes because we've got diversity, and then expecting everybody to behave in a certain way, then we're not going to get to the end goal. I think it's about getting to know the individual, which is really important.
I think, Sabrina, I think I can kind of add, just on that one, is that, and I think linking what we were talking about earlier is, however, the aspects of our own backgrounds and our diversities that we can bring to the table. And I think, Mark, I agree in the sense that the ideal is that a manager or leader will be able to say, well, actually, I'd like to include Richard because of this is what he does and this is how he thinks, this is his contribution. But also there's a point which is, if we look at policy and process, to recognize that, my needs may not be the same as Sabrina's, even if we both decide to adopt children, for example. And so, if my husband and I decide to go on that journey, there's barriers that unfortunately we will still experience that, Sabrina may not experience in the same way. But I think the ideal absolutely is that we don't kind of go, right, well, we got one of these and one of these and one of these, therefore we're diverse, yes, but actually, are we inclusive? And again, I think that's an important point. But I do think on the norms piece, there is an opportunity, and probably Topsy, this links to your point, with regards to having that diversity of team experiences, is where individuals can look at things through a lens that maybe others don't see. And I think sometimes that's the conversation that happens when we talk about engaging men, is to, when an individual has never experienced that discrimination, has never walked into a space and felt judged, how do you get someone to empathize with that? And it's not to then say, well, you don't know what it feels like and you can never understand, because that's very exclusionary. But at the same time, to sort of say, well, this is what it feels like and this is what I have, on a daily basis in some circumstances and situations. And how, if you haven't experienced that, to support with the empathy, but that bringing in rather than going, you'll never understand it, therefore don't get involved. Actually, that's not very inclusive, and that's obviously what we're trying to do. But I think being able to look at things like the gender norms through a different lens, as I mentioned, my husband and I, there's conversations with friends of ours, which is where even in professional couples, there's a pressure on the female partner to do more of the housework, or to do more of the emotional work, or to remember everyone's birthdays and birthday cards. If you forget a birthday, it was two men, no one really tells us off. We have that privilege. If we don't remember birthday or birthday card, we don't get passive aggressive comments, from family members. But I do know that my female friends in their partnership, even if it is her husband's family, if she forgets their birthdays, then she gets the passive aggressive comments, and I think these are some of the things where we talk about unpicking the systems, and as part of that, challenging what we perceive. Sabrina, you mentioned this as well, what the norms are, because at the moment, I don't think those gender binary norms really helps anybody in some ways, and that we do need to really tackle what's happening and what the implications are. If there are certain anchoring rules that might help people, identify and see where they fit, but to not then be too blinkered with regards to that. And I think that sort of blinkering can happen in lots of different spaces. But yeah, I just want to mention kind of about the binary, and where individuals can bring a different lens based on their experiences, which we should recognize them as humans, but I think we can't negate the community experiences and the identities that our colleagues will have in the wider world and can bring to the workplace as well.
Can I just jump in very quickly, Richard, on what you were just saying? I mean, I guess I know how it works from a sporting point of view. It's almost a lot easier to engage in those conversations. But then I guess from a traditional workplace, and probably one for you, Mark and Glyn, as well, from your experiences, how do you go about starting those conversations? Because again, like I say, traditionally, our coach would say to the team, like, guys, we're going out for food and drinks, and you're all just going to sit and talk and start sharing and getting to know each other, and you just start to naturally form those bonds. But I guess it's maybe less organic in a workplace environment. So how do you go about starting those sorts of conversations?
Topsy, I don't think it's that different necessarily in a workplace environment. I think that there is a huge challenge with affinity bias, because it will be it's mostly men in leadership, and it's traditionally, let's talk traditionally, it's easier. It's been down the pub, or it's been in the golf, and there were people who have been excluded because of that, and that's why our employer resource groups or employee resource groups are so important, because it creates safe spaces. But I think it's then, particularly in leadership, it's making sure that leadership understands that their social time is an asset. Yeah. And if the only thing that they're doing with their social time is playing golf with people who look like them, going to the pub with people who look like them, speaking to the chap who supports the same rugby team as them on a Monday morning about the results, then a significant part of your organization, a significant part of your team are being left out and are not feeling part of the team. So I think it is ensuring that as leaders, we do things that include everybody. Now, that doesn't mean we can't go to the golf and we can't go to the pub, but it does mean we need to make time for that person who doesn't share those interests, and find things that we do share in common and build relationships. It's then also, team building events and all that type of thing, which bring us all together.
And I certainly feel, Mark, that progress has been made on that quite a lot in the workplace. If I look at the insurance market, that tradition, let's just all go for drinks. That would be the stock thing. Let's all go for drinks. Actually, you look at the diversity of things that are now going on. Outside of that, whether that's you mentioned golf days. I mean, spinning classes, spa days, whitewater rafting. There's a whole load of stuff. It can't be inclusive to everyone, but there's a wider range of stuff. You then go and meet people actually where, I didn't know you were into cycling as well, whereas before you might never have had those sort of connections. So I do think progress is being made on some of those areas, which is important.
And Glyn, do you think, I think also, because there's those formal occasions like that, there's arranged occasions, but just, and maybe even more important, it's those informal occasions. It's the water cooler moment, who do you sit with at lunchtime? I was working with a big insurance company down on the south coast in the UK, and we went into their staff restaurant at lunchtime, and we looked around, and the tables were gendered. There were tables of women, tables of men, tables of women, tables of men, and you thought, why is this? And it may be because they were all just departments going out for lunch together, but actually it felt an inclusive environment until we went to lunch, because there were people segregated in that way. So I think these informal moments are really important, as important.
And I think some of those, in my experience, some of those challenges, you've got to pick your moments to force change. I think with some of them, I think flexible working is fascinating, right? I think it's a really interesting, hot desking. Sorry, I think is a really fascinating view of human behaviour, that you can sit anywhere you want, but the likelihood is people will come and sit in the same desk. Same group of people every day. And I think in a business context, if you as a leader are happy about that, fine. But if you want that to be different, sometimes you then got to insert yourself in a bit to go, right, we need to work out how we change this, because
And I think so a lot of that again is leading by example, and the need for role models here. Again, we were working with another big insurance company who had got a market leading paternity leave policy. It hit the front pages when they launched it. 2 years later, hardly any men were taking it up, and we had sat down, had conversations with the board, and it turned out that the board were happy with the policy, but none of them were taking it up. None of them had become fathers, but none of them were standing up and saying, I'm going home this afternoon because it's my lad's football match, or it's school sports day, or it's the nativity play. They were all hiding that, and they were actually hiding it from each other. So I think, hot desking and things, it's the leaders that are sitting as much as anybody else at the same desk every time. We've got to have these role models in our world.
We've mentioned so many times about how those gender norms in society and how they percolate into the workplace are damaging for everyone, right? I think everybody is kind of desperate to break the framework that's been set for them. There's the speaker on masculinity that I absolutely love hearing, Elliot Ray, and he talks about that man box, that strong kind of armor that's been put on men for centuries and centuries around. I have to behave this way. I have to be seen as strong. I can't be seen talking about my mental health. I don't want to be seen as the primary carer at home, etc. And yet today we've got a work environment that really allows people to break those stereotypes, outdated stereotype, and make the most of it. Glyn, you mentioned the flexible working, all of these things is a great segue for people to actually use that and redefine gender norms. Topsy, I know you're a proud father. That's something that we discussed, when we first met and all that. So, beyond that, like, what are the other opportunities that you see today to redefine those gender norms? Sports is a massive area where I guess masculinity has fitted, for a long time, some stereotypes. Do you see progress, and where else can we push the boundaries?
Yeah, I do, absolutely. It's I guess I may be just the last of a generation that was, for want of a better word, your toughen up generation. We didn't talk about mental health. Talking about paternity leave, I just remember when my first was born, he was born on a Saturday. I was back at training on the Monday. And that's not. I didn't know if there was a paternity policy. I didn't look to ask, but I probably looked at what happened previously, and guys were just there the next day. So there wasn't a thing of, right, you've had a child. I know your wife's had the child, but you'd go and take 2 weeks off. You just had to be back at training. That just seemed to be the norm. Whereas I think now players are definitely speaking up more, and that's a big one as well. I think one of the biggest change in recent years has been player voice. I guess they understand that without players, there's no game. And actually they are central to that. So them speaking up about paternity leave and saying, yes, I know my wife's the one that maybe has delivered the baby, or, whether you've adopted or whatever it is, but I am also entitled to spend those early moments with my child. And actually, in terms of flexible working as well, I think clubs and teams are much better in saying, what, it's his first football game. I really, really want to be there. Go. Go and enjoy those moments, because you don't get them back. You don't get them back. They happen once and then they're gone, and you don't get a chance to live that again. So I think organizations are starting to understand a bit more where they need to be flexible, where things have changed. Mental health is another huge one. Again, my generation, mental health was a sign of weakness. For men, you think, oh no, what do you mean mental health? What do you mean you're struggling? Get on with it, crack on, toughen up, that sort of generation. Whereas now, yes, sport is a tough world, and you do have to be tough both physically and mentally to survive in it. But there's a balance. There's a balance between pushing through and being resilient versus actually, I am struggling mentally with what's going on, and being able to talk about that openly. Again, you need the right environment within your culture to be able to do that, and for it to be taken seriously, and to understand where the balance is. I think, again, if you get that right, it's only going to empower the people that are within your organization. So, there's progress is definitely being made along those. I think men are starting to feel more that they can, I guess, be themselves. Not that this is how I have to be because this is the norm. Actually, I can be me. When I'm great, I'm great. When I'm not, I'm not. And that's okay. I'm allowed to do that. And I think that's going to be a continual journey. Everything that we're talking about is continuous. It's going to keep on. But the fact that there has been progress, say, over the last decade, is definitely very encouraging.
So you talk about progress there. I have a lot of conversations with my 90-year-old mother, and she talks really passionately about how women's lives have changed in the last 60 years. the day she got married, she lost her job because her employment contract with a financial services firm had a marriage bar clause in it. They didn't employ married women. Society's expectations of her were that she'd be a stay-at-home mother, that should be obedient and supportive and domestic and all of these things. And she wonders at how actually women have freed themselves from the apron strings that used to attach them to the kitchen sink, if you like. But hey, men, listen, we're competitive, okay? I look at my dad's life and compare that to mine and my son's, and not much has changed, compared with women. Women are now, they're tops of industry, they're top sports people. They're in every aspect of our lives. They go to space. They invent vaccines, things that my mother could only ever dream of. We've moved forward. Women have taken a huge step forward. I would say to the competitive men on this call and listening into this call, our lives haven't changed much compared with my father's. Yeah, my father wasn't allowed into the maternity ward or into the hospital when I was born because men didn't go there. It wasn't a place for men. I was one of the first generations that was there at my children's birth, but I was back at work the next day. I begged for a couple of days off, actually. Today we've got paternity leave. Some of my 60-year-old friends who are just becoming grandfathers are talking passionately about how they've changed their first ever nappy on a grandchild. And what a lovely, caring, beautiful experience that was, and how they didn't get the opportunity and regret not having the opportunity to do that with their children, their own children. The world has changed, but men are holding themselves back by, quite frankly, complying with these outdated stereotypes that are mostly associated with the 1950s, frankly, with my dad's life. And we can free ourselves. We can get opportunity, choice, freedom, better health outcomes, be the type of fathers, the type of husbands, the type of leaders, work in the type of cultures and environments that we want to work in if we free ourselves from these restrictive male stereotypes.
Do you not think some of that, Mark, is men have changed, but in ways that perhaps aren't as openly visible? Because the things you've talked about in terms of women's lives changing have been they're quite visible things, aren't they? Like
yeah.
People getting vaccinations, being outwardly successful. Is this more about a redressing of the balance where you had sort of, men doing things that women aren't and vice versa? And now there's a sort of, we're getting to more, of a balanced position where there are things that are changing in men's lives. And I see that, in my own life and in the workplace, but they're perhaps less visible.
I think they're probably, as you say, they're probably less visible, and they should be more visible. But I think our journey may have, men's, if my mother's journey or women's journeys started in the early 1960s, I think, men's journeys probably started, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, to any degree, and we've got a long way to go. We've got a long way to go. And that men's journey is full of opportunity for us.
It's exactly what I was going to say, Mark. I think today I still hear too often that, the changes that we're trying to make, trying to really advocate for a more inclusive environment everywhere. Too many people are still, or too many men, I should say, are still seeing that as something has been taken away from me, or I've got to do less of what I was doing. We're actually hearing everything we talked about today and how today men are suffering, somehow. It's more of an opportunity than it is of a sort of a drawback. So that shift in seeing DI as an opportunity is not fully there yet. And that's perhaps what needs to be achieved through the conversations that we're having, through the network groups, etc. Do you have these kind of conversations in the groups that that you lead, Glyn, at work?
Yeah, we do. I mean, there's a few things. I think one of the things that Mark mentioned, which I think is so important, is role modeling in the workplace. Well, actually in life, but definitely in the workplace. I think role modeling behaviours. if you're talking about some of the changes, Mark, that we want to see and how do you accelerate those, that role modeling piece is really vital in my view. And it's not necessarily about having an individual who's a role model for everything. It's about a behaviour that you want to role model. I mean, I've had a great example in my career where I was fortunate enough to attend a presentation with the board of a big UK PLC that everyone would know, and I was very much on the periphery. And the CEO of this company, one thing he did, which I really took away, was when he got to the end of it, he went around the whole room of everyone in that room to ask, has anyone got anything to add or anything insightful? And just that type of behaviour, I thought, right, that's a behaviour I'd really want to role model. So I do think that role modelling of behaviours is really important. The other thing I think I'm always conscious of as well is normalising some of these conversations. I can't remember who it said, what it said about leaving to go and watch your son's football match. Letting people know you're doing that and normalising those conversations, I do think is really important if you want to sort of get change and accelerate change a little bit. And I still don't feel that perhaps happens enough.
Yeah. And I think, Glyn, as well as role modelling, I think we need to look at how men are role modelled in the media as well. I've been doing an exercise recently of just looking at how men are portrayed, and we're either superheroes, or we're the bad guys, and there's very few instances in the media, television, where actually there's just ordinary men getting on with their ordinary lives and enjoying them and celebrating them. And I think part of the journey that women went on was having these amazing role models breaking barriers for them. Now, in our world, that's a little bit more mundane, but actually sort of, celebrating normal, everyday men enjoying the opportunities and choice that being a man now gets them is really, really important. And we need more of it.
And Sabrina, I wonder if that kind of links into some of the kind of practical points that we've touched on about, how organizations can role model a diversity of individuals, and even thinking about things like a diversity calendar. There are heritage months. October is Black History Month, for example, and as part of that is making sure that we're profiling a diversity of Black men in particular as part of that month, so that people realize that, as a demographic, there is huge diversity within and across that community. And that also helps with regards to the stigma that we know, again, specific ethnic minority male communities will experience. And so when looking at things like our efforts earlier in the year around Ramadan is the experiences of young Muslim men as well, in order to kind of showcase an underrepresented group in the organization, but also to dispel some perceptions about, Ramadan fasting, etc., and what the experiences are for, especially young Muslim men in places like the UK, being mindful of things like the riots recently as well. And so I think that's an important point for us to look at. How do we bake this in? I think, Mark, we all mentioned in Topsy as well, how do you just make things more inclusive? And what are the things that we can do which actually helps everybody? Well, we might see it initially through the lens of gender equality. We might see it through religious inclusion, but actually it's really helpful for everybody to see that diversity so that we do start to unpick the fabric of bias that's been woven in our minds, where we think that a man has to be like this and it has to behave like this. And if anything sort of starts to, shake that box, Sabrina, to your example, people become very angry. And almost anything that's left is sort of anger, because what they're used to, what's the norm, what they were told was right, is starting to be unpicked. But actually, that's not necessarily a bad thing. However, we have the fight or flight response as humans, don't we? Which is like, this is new, I'm not happy about it. You either withdraw and go, you know what, this D&I stuff, somebody else can do it. Or you go, oh, I disagree with that, and it's now going to affect me. What about my opportunities? And I think rather than looking at it through that binary, how can we be more inclusive and lean into some of those changes without being fearful of it, maybe? But I think, looking at how do we weave that into our processes, I think is an important kind of next step as well.
I think just to pick up on a comment you made there, Richard, the sort of leaning into it, I think you've got to be prepared to make mistakes as well. If with any change, there's going to come a bit of pain. I'd imagine Topsy in a sporting context, you try things right, they work, they don't work. If they don't work, you've got to learn from them. But I do think, it's quite an important point for everyone who's sort of nervous about getting involved or having some of these conversations or whatever it is. You've got to be open to making mistakes, but more importantly, learning from them.
Thank you. Richard, I think we're coming to the end of our session, so I'll let you, sort of have the final word to conclude this.
Sure, of course. And I think, great conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. I think, it's really interesting, Tops, to have the world of sport, because that's very much almost a microcosm and allegory for society in many ways. Even a game can feel like a metaphor for society. And Glyn, I know the work that you're doing and being very much on the front line, with the Man Network as well. And I know, Mark, the ongoing work that you've been doing, it's a pleasure to hear your experiences, and I know the work that we continue. And Sabrina, obviously, we, as D&I people, we do this all the time. But really, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you to the panelists. And we do have some allyship resources that we can share as a follow-up. And obviously, I know there's lots of allyship conversations about engaging men as allies, but also being allies for a diversity of men. But we'll stick to time. So thank you everyone for joining us and engaging with the Dive In Festival. Please do engage the rest of the day, and we will see you next year as well. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.